So we're recording now. Yes, we are. Right. So we will get to our topic now. We've only got about 40 minutes left, so maybe we can steal a few more minutes. We'll see how we go on. The topic today is: should we still be fasting, given that we no longer are sitting in a city, sitting in solitude? We now have Har Habayit B'Yadeinu. As you've heard, we can actually go up to Har Habayit, not all of it, but we can go up to Har Habayit. We have Yerushalayim. Should we still be fasting? Do we need still to be fasting and mourning on the day of Tisha B'av? Let's start by looking at chapter 1 of Eicha, the book of Lamentations written by Jeremiah. Let's just look at the first few words. Eicha yashva vadad ha'ira bati am haitaka almana. Oh, how the city that was once so populous is sitting alone. Badad means alone. The same word as bidud, by the way. There you see that word. Eicha yashva vadad. Same word as bidud, which is so important to us at the moment. Is our city in bidud? Do we have a city of Jerusalem which is sitting alone? Is the city of Jerusalem like a widow? She that was great among the nations, a princess among the provinces, has become tributary. Is Jerusalem tributary to anything? No. Jerusalem is our eternal capital. We have control over Jerusalem. So why should we have to mourn and sit on the ground on Tisha B'av? That's the question that we need to ask. And we can read through all Eicha, we can read through what went on there, how Jerusalem, let's just look at verse 7 here. Jerusalem recalls the days of her poverty and her miseries, all her precious things that were from the days of old, when her people fell into the hand of the adversary and there was none to help her. The enemies gazed, gloating on her desolation. That does not describe the Jerusalem of today. So the question is, should we and do we have to fast and mourn on Tisha B'av? Now, this question, which you may think would be a question for the modern day. It would be a question for perhaps 1948 and onwards. You could certainly ask the question from 1967 and onwards. I know for a fact that on Tisha B'av of 1967, Johnny and Linda Halpern were celebrating their honeymoon, and they were in Yerushalayim on Tisha B'av of 1967. It must have been the most amazing experience. Perhaps one day, Johnny, we haven't got time today, Johnny, because Rabbi Doe's nicked our time, but perhaps one day Johnny will give us some insights into what it was like. David Marks earlier in the week sent me a recollection of Tisha B'av by Rav Soloveitchik, and in there he describes what it was like on Tisha B'av of 1967. They abandoned the kinot halfway through during the service that he was at, because they said, how can we be saying kinot here? Har Habayit B'Yadeinu. We've got Jerusalem back. We have the Temple Mount. It's in our hands. How can we possibly be mourning? So you might think that the question that I've asked you, should we be mourning and should we be fasting in 1967 and onwards, you might think that this is a modern question only for 1967 and beyond. But of course, that isn't the case, because we can trace this question right back to Tanakh. And in Tanakh, we have one of the books of Nevi'im, the book of Zecharia, which I'm putting on the screen now, and we're going to be looking at chapter 7. A little bit of historical background of Zecharia. Zecharia was a prophet, and he lived at the time when the second temple was just being rebuilt. He and his co-prophet Haggai had overseen what was known as Shivat Zion, the return to Zion. You will be very familiar with that expression because every Shabbat and Chag, when you say Birkat HaMazon, when you bench, you'll say Shir HaMalot et Shivat Zion. Shuva et Shivat Zion. Hashem should return Shivat Zion, the returnees to Zion. The return to Zion after the Babylonian exile, the first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE. By the way, Paul Kuttner was talking about that this morning, about the discrepancy. There are two different time zones, two timelines really. There's 150-year, approximately 150 years discrepancy between various opinions. The opinion that we go by is the 586 BCE is the accepted time when the first temple was destroyed. We were in Babylonian exile for 70 years, and then King Cyrus gave permission for the temple to be rebuilt, and not many people went, to be honest. Most people stayed where they were. They were comfortable in the diaspora. They were comfortable in Bavel particularly. Bavel was although it's in the east, it was the Western Europe of its time. The Jews were very comfortable in Bavel, and most of them did not go back to Eretz Israel to rebuild the second temple. They were only about 15 to 20% of the Jews of Bavel returned to Yerushalayim to rebuild the temple. The first attempt at rebuilding the temple was an abject failure. The locals who were there at the time, who were not the Jews, remember they had the Assyrians who had destroyed the northern kingdom, had brought in a new type of punishment called exile, and what they did was they took populations from their comfort zone and they moved them into a different place. So the people who were living in Eretz Yisrael at that time were not the local populations. They were people who'd been brought in from outside, and they were not keen for the Jews to come back and to rebuild their temple. So after 2 years of trying to build the temple, it had to be stopped. And then about 20 years later, the grandson of King Cyrus, known as Darius or Daryavish in Hebrew, gave the order that the Jews were to be allowed to rebuild the temple again. And it's in his reign that the prophet Zecharia has his prophecy that we're going to look at today. After the second year of Dariavish's reign, he gave permission for the temple to be rebuilt. And as you can see from the first verse, Vayihi bishnat arba leDariavish hamelech hayad dvar Hashem el Zecharia ba'arba'a lachodesh hatshii b'Kislev. We're told exactly when this happened. It was in the 4th year of King Darius's reign. The word of Hashem came to Zecharia on the 4th day of Kislev. And what happened was the men in Bavel sent a question to the prophet Zecharia. Vayishlach bet el sharetzer v'regem melech v'anashav lachalot et pnei Hashem. These people, Sharezer and Regem Melech, sent a shaila to Zecharia. And it says like this: Leimor al hakohanim asher leveit Hashem tzvakot vel anavim leimar. Go off to Jerusalem, to where they're building the temple. Over there you'll find a prophet and you'll find the Kohanim. And I want you to ask them the question: Ha'edka b'chodesh hachamishi hanazer ka'asher asiti ze kamesh shanim. Shall I continue to weep in the 5th month, abstaining as I have done these many years. In other words, what they were asking was, should we still be celebrating? No, celebrating is not the right word. Should we still be commemorating this weeping in the 5th month? Which is the 5th month? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av. The 5th month is Av. What they were asking all those years ago, how many years ago? 2,500 years ago, the people in the diaspora sent a message to Zecharia saying, should we still be fasting and weeping on Tisha B'av? Because up until now, in the last 70 years, we've been crying on Tisha B'av for the fallen Beit HaMikdash. But now, since the last few years, we have been rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, it's not finished yet, but we now have the building of the Beit HaMikdash going on apace. So should we be crying on Tisha B'av? Yes, Hilary, you want to ask me a question?
Hang on. No, yeah. Okay, is it not like, let's say, Pesach, where you're relaying the story, you're remembering? I mean, they say about Shabbos that you're committed to Shabbos is to remember. So you're keeping it alive by remembering it for the right reasons. Like, are you fasting for the right reasons? Are you fasting for yourself, or do you see what I mean?
Okay. So the question that they were asking, we'll come into your answer in a moment, Hilary. But the question that the people in Bavel were asking was, should we still be mourning in a situation where what we were mourning about is no longer a problem? In other words, the problem was we didn't have a Beit HaMikdash, and now we're going to have a Beit HaMikdash. Now, clearly, one of the answers to that question would be what Hilary has alluded to, and that is that you only have to read Eicha, you only have to read what went on and the tragedies and how the horrible, horrible things that went on to know that that is not something that we can just rub out of history. And so therefore, clearly on that level, we should commemorate what has gone on. The question is, should we still be mourning and fasting? We certainly can't forget what has gone on, but should we still be mourning for something which is no longer missing in our lives? That was the question that was asked to Zecharia. Helen and Harvey, yes, what would you like to ask?
Hi. And then the same should apply to Nachem Hashem Elokeinu in this afternoon's Amida. You know, if you read the translation, you ask yourself, why on earth are we saying this?
Okay, you're right, and that is part of the question. That exactly is the question that that they were asking to Zecharia, and that I am asking us today. So let's have a look and see how Zecharia answered the question. And of course, Zecharia was a prophet. So he was very fortunate, unlike us. He had a direct line to Hashem. And verse 4, Pasuk Dalet, tells us that. And the word of Hashem came to me. And this is what he said. So Zecharia answered the question that was set to him by the people of the diaspora. And he answered the question in the name of Hashem. This is what Hashem said. Say to all the people of the land the following. Kitzamtem, when you fasted, v'sapod, and you mourned, b'chamishi, in the 5th month, b'shvi'i, in the 7th month, v'zeh shivim shana, all these last 70 years that you were in exile, hatzom tzamtuni ani, question mark, were you fasting for me? Did I tell you to fast in the 5th month and the 7th month? By the way, which is the fast of the 7th month? The 7th month, of course, is Tishrei. It is not Yom Kippur that he's referring to. He's referring to Tzom Gedalia, the fast of Gedalia, because of course we do fast for Hashem on Yom Kippur. That's a mitzvah from the Torah. What he's saying here, Hashem is saying via Zecharia, I never told you to fast in Av. I never told you to fast on Tzom Gedalia, which commemorates the end of the Churban. And then verse 6, and when you eat and when you drink, are you not the ones who eat and you not the ones that drink? In other words, Hashem is saying, I never told you to fast. What are you asking me for, whether you should continue to fast? That's not a question for me to answer. That's a question for you to answer for yourselves. But, he says, I'll tell you something. Since you've asked me, let me give you a piece of advice. And then he goes on to verse 7. Halo et advarim asher kra Hashem b'yad hanviim harishonim b'yot Yerushalayim yoshevet ushalva v'areh sivotea v'anegeg v'ashvela yoshev. Was it not the words that Hashem proclaimed through the former prophets? Who are the former prophets? Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, when Jerusalem was settled and tranquil, and its cities were around it, and the Negev and the lowland was settled. What he's saying is, remember what those previous prophets said. Remember, Yirmiyahu and Yeshayahu, Jeremiah and Isaiah, they were the prophets of doom. Jeremiah is called the prophet of doom. His prophecies were all about how terrible it was going to be. He prophesied, and so did Isaiah. Look in Eicha, look in Chazon Yeshayahu, the Haftorah that we said last Shabbat. All about the prophecy of doom. What's going to happen? That was at a time when the first temple was still standing. And what did the prophets say? The prophets said, if you don't buck your ideas up, then this terrible destruction is going to come upon you. So when Zecharia, when the people asked Zecharia whether they should continue fasting, and Zecharia, as it were, asked Hashem, what do you think, God? Do you think they should still fast? God said, I tell you what, Zecharia, why don't you tell them this? I actually don't care whether you fast or whether you eat or drink. That's not my issue. What I care about is whether you're going to listen to the words of the prophets, the previous prophets. And now let's have a look at what those previous prophets said. Let's go quickly to Yeshayahu. This is Isaiah chapter 1. This was the Haftorah of last Shabbat. Verse 3. I have to go a bit quick because we're going to run out of time. An ox knows his owner, and a donkey his master's crib. Israel does not know. My people does not consider. Even an animal knows its owner. Even an animal knows who the boss is. The people of Israel, they've rejected their owner. They've rejected their God. And then he goes over here later on, and he says, verse 11, of what use are your many sacrifices to me, says Hashem. I am sated with the burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fattened cattle and the blood of bulls and sheep and he goats I do not want. When you come to appear before me, who requested this of you to trample my courts? Don't bring me vain meal offerings. It is a smoke of abomination to me. New moons and Sabbaths and Moadim, I cannot bear it. He says, all your services in the temple, I'm sick of them. I don't want to see them. I don't want to hear them. I don't want to smell them. I don't want anything to do with them. They are an abomination to me. Why? Why? Because of this. Verse 16, he says, this is what I want. Wash and cleanse yourself. Remove the evil of your deeds from before my eyes and cease to do evil. What evil is he talking about? What evil is it that those people were doing that Isaiah was saying in the word, throughout the word of Hashem. Verse 18.
Can you not get past up the stairs? No?
Whoever that is, can you please mute? Because I can't see who you are.
Is the seat, is the chair in the hall?
So he says here, verse 17, learn to do good, seek justice, strengthen the robbed, perform justice for the orphan, and plead the case of the widow. So he's talking about the lack of social justice. Lack of social justice in the people of Israel, who was going on at the time of Yeshayahu. This was what caused the destruction. Hashem says via Yeshayahu, I'm not interested in your service. I'm not interested in your offerings. I'm interested in social justice. Are you being kind to the orphan and the widow? Are you looking after the weak in your society? No is the answer, and therefore all your bits and pieces that you do, I'm not interested. Your silver has become dross. Your wine is diluted with water. All the things that you bring to me are worthless because you have failed to bring me social justice. That is what the prophets said back at the time of the first temple. So let's go back to Zecharia now. Zecharia, where are we? There we are, back in Zecharia. And he says the same thing. He says the words of the former prophets. I don't care whether you fast or you don't fast. What I care about is whether you're listening to the former prophets. And just in case the people had forgotten what those former prophets, Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu, had said, the word came to Zecharia again. A prophecy came from Hashem to Zecharia, and he says it clearly. Look at verse 9. Ko amar Hashem tzavakot lemor. So says Hashem, Mishpat emet, shfotu v'chesed v'rachamim, aso ish et achiv. Execute true judgment. Mishpat emet, true judgment. That means no bribery, no corruption. Perform kindness, chesed v'rachamim. Who needs chesed? Who needs rachamim? The next verse will tell you. Almana, yatom, ger v'ani. The widow, the orphan, the stranger, the poor person. Al ta'ashoku. Do not oppress him. V'ra'at ish achiv al tachshavu bilvavechem. Do not think evil in your hearts one against the other. Look in the Gemara and you'll see why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. The Gemara in Ta'anit will tell you that the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of Avodah Zarah, idol worship, because of murder, and because of sexual immorality. The Gemara will tell you that the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred. But if you go back to Tanakh, if you go back to the prophets, remember the Gemara was not prophets. They were rabbis and they were holy people, but they were not prophets. The prophets, Zecharia, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, these great prophets speaking the words of God himself, tell us very clearly why the temples were destroyed. The temples were destroyed because of a failure of the people to execute social justice. There was no social justice. The orphan, the stranger, the poor man, the widow, these people were not treated kindly. Mishpat was not mishpat emet. Judgment was not truthful judgment. We're going to read very shortly in a couple of weeks' time in Parshat Shoftim, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof. You shall surely pursue justice. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Why the double expression? Because justice alone is no good. Justice has to be pursued in a just manner, It has to be true justice. Mishpat emet. Velibam samu Shamir mishmoa et Torah. They made their hearts like a Shamir. The Shamir was a stone. Some say it was a diamond, some say it was tungsten. Whatever it was a very hard stone. Interestingly, Rav Steinsaltz translates the Shamir as an adamant, which is apparently a stone. We will know the word adamant from as an adjective in the English language. If you are adamant about something, then it means you are absolutely steadfast in your opinion. That's where it comes from. The Shamir is apparently a stone called the adamant. But either way, it's as hard as rock, as hard as a diamond, hard as a Shamir. Their hearts were hard. Who is it that has a hard heart? Somebody who is cruel. Who has a soft heart? If you say somebody's soft-hearted, what do you mean? You mean that he's kind and he's merciful. Here the people were hard-hearted. They made their heart as hard as a Shamir, not to listen to the Torah and the words that the Lord of hosts sent through his spirit of the earlier prophets. Which words were they hard-hearted about? The words that the prophets were saying. And the prophets never told us to fast. The prophets never told us not to eat or drink on Tisha B'av. The prophets told us to mend our ways. The prophets told us to stop being hard-hearted. The prophets told us that we needed to get our acts together in social justice. And if we don't, look what will happen to us, the last verse of this chapter. And with a whirlwind I will scatter them among all the nations whom they do not know. And the land shall be waste after them, with no one passing through or returning. They made a precious land a desolation. Some of you may remember or have even read yourselves the quotation from Mark Twain when he traveled through the Holy Land in the 19th century. He describes a land of utter desolation. Read the Kinot, you'll see a description of desolation. Eicha yashva vadad. How the city is sitting in isolation, in desolation. Why? Because of a failure of social justice in the land of Israel. We were then spread out into Galut. We were exiled into the various lands, and our land became a land of desolation. So now we have been given a third chance. Not a second chance, a third chance. Because the second chance came at the time of Zecharia. Imagine what the people would have felt at the time of Zecharia. They're just rebuilding the temple. Imagine today if the Waqf came along to the chief rabbi of Jerusalem and said, you know what, we've had a change of heart. Here's the keys to the Dome of the Rock. You can have it. Gesundheit, I don't suppose they say that word, but whatever the Arabic equivalent is, Gesundheit, go and build the Beit HaMikdash. There you go, you can have it. Okay? What hopes would we have? We would be so excited. This is the time when we're going to put it all right. We're going to have a chance to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. That's how they felt at the time of Zecharia. The people had gone back from the diaspora, not all of them, but those that had gone back, the pioneers, those with the spirit of Hashem in their hearts, had gone back. And with Zecharia, with Ezra, Nehemiah, with Haggai, they were building the Beit HaMikdash. They didn't know it was going to be destroyed 400 and odd years later. They didn't know that it was all going to come crashing down again at the hands of the Romans. They felt it would last forever because they were on the threshold of something great. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Look at the next chapter of Zecharia. He carries on with his prophecy. Verse 4, so says Hashem. These are familiar words to you. Old men and women shall sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each man with his staff in his hand because of his old age. Old people were dying at the time of the Khurban. Zecharia is saying old people will no longer die. It'll be a time of great joy. The next verse, the streets of the city shall be filled with boys and girls playing in its streets. What did we read about in the Kinot? We read that terrible things happened. Mothers consumed their children. There were no children playing in the streets of Jerusalem. The prophet Zecharia is telling, yes, it will happen again. I will save my people. Look at verse 7. So says Hashem. I will save my people from the land of the east and from the land of the west. In Hebrew it says, Me'eretz Mizrach u'me'eretz Mavoah Shemesh, from the land of the east where the sun rises and the land where the sun sets. Look what's happened in the last 120 years, and in particular in the last 70 odd years. The people of the east, all the Jews from the Arab lands from the east. We're going to hear some more about it on Sunday night, Bezrat Hashem, from Danny Limor. We heard about it a couple of weeks ago, about the lost tribes. They've come from the lands of the east, from the Arab lands, from Iraq, from Iran to the east. And from the west, they've come from Europe, Jews from Europe, Jews from America, Jews from the UK. They've come. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has kept his promise. He's brought us back, or at least he's in the process of bringing us back. But then we get the warning. Next verse, let your hands be strong, you who hear in these days these words from the mouth of the prophets that were prophesying in the days of the foundation of the house of the Lord of hosts that was laid, even that the temple might it build. He says, be strong and listen. Listen to what those prophets are telling you, right? Because if you don't, then the whole thing will happen again. He says, I've turned about, verse 15. I'm going to do good in these days. I'm going to do good to Jerusalem, to the house of Judah. Do not fear. So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has fulfilled in our days. How fortunate are we? Our days, our generation. Hashem has fulfilled the prophecy of Zecharia again. He did it in the times of Zecharia and they blew it. In the times of the Second Temple, they did not make a life and a land full of social justice. They did not appropriately look after the weak. They did not look after the less fortunate. They did not do what they should do. There was corruption in the Beit HaMikdash. The Kohanim Gedolim, some of them weren't even Kohanim. Many of them were so corrupt. The kings, the leaders of the people, many of them were corrupt. And they all came crashing down. That was the second chance. We blew it. We, in this generation, are the fortunate ones. We are seeing the third chance that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us. We're seeing the prophecy of Zecharia fulfilled for a second time. I have turned about, says Hashem. I've planned in these days to do good to Jerusalem. Look how beautiful Jerusalem is. Go and walk around the old city of Jerusalem. See the beauty that's there. Go to the Kotel. Know that there is more Torah being learned in the old city of Jerusalem today than at any other time in the entirety of history. There are more yeshivot, there are more seminaries, there are more shuls, there are more shiurim, there are more activities connected to Yahadut, to Judaism. There's more inspiration going on in Jerusalem than ever before. And that is a wonderful thing. But is that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us alone? Is it that all that he wants from us? Is that even the main thing that he wants for us? Let's have a look and see. Verse 19. So says Hashem, the fast of the 4th month, that's Tammuz, whether it's the fast of the 9th of Tammuz, which was the fast day in those days, as we said earlier on before when we were talking about York, or whether it's the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, that's the fast of the 4th month. The fast of the 5th month, that's Tisha B'av. The fast of the 7th month, that's Tzom Gedalia. The fast where we fast for the assassination of Jew by Jew, when they sealed the end of the time of the Churban. That was the end of the time when the Jewish sovereignty over the land of the first temple. And the fast of the 10th month, that's Tevet. That's the fast when the siege of Jerusalem first started. They were all sad fasts. There will come a time, says Hashem, when these fasts shall be for the house of Judah for joy and happiness. Simcha u'moadim tovim. So the answer to the question eventually is given by Hashem through Zecharia. Remember, what happened was the people asked the question, a simple halachic question. Should we be fasting on Tisha B'av? Because now we're starting to build the 2nd temple. Hashem says, what are you asking me that question for? I never told you to fast. I'm not interested in your fasting. But I'll tell you what I am interested in. I'm interested in you listening to the voices of the prophets who you didn't listen to in the first place. And that's what caused you to have to mourn in the first place. Because if you'd have listened to them and if you'd have practiced social justice, then the temple would never have been destroyed and you would never have had to fast it in the first place. And now he says, I'll give you the answer to the question. The answer to the question is that eventually those days of fasting will become days of happiness. But look at the end of the pasuk. I didn't finish the pasuk. Let me read the pasuk to you again. And I'll read it you in Hebrew first. Ko amar Hashem Tzavakot. So says Hashem. Tzom HaRavi'i, the fast of Tammuz. Tzom HaChamishi, Tisha B'av. Tzom HaShavi'i, Tzom Gedalia. V'tzom HaAsiri, Asara B'Tevet. Yiyeh LeBeit Yehuda will be, not are, will be, in the future, for the house of Judah, L'Sasson U'Lesimcha, joy and happiness, U'Lemoadim Tovim, and for beautiful holidays. When V'Ha'amet V'Hashalom Ehavu. When Emet, peace, and Shalom, Emet, truth, and Shalom, peace, Ehavu, are loved. In other words, when they are recognized as the appropriate values, when they are valued. When will we stop fasting? When we recognize that all the things that we have failed in, and in particular, the failures of being kind to one another, Shalom, Ahava, peace and love, when that sinat chinam between each of us and our brothers has gone, when shalom, when peace reigns, and when emet, truth, in other words, no corruption, in other words, no bribery, in other words, emet v'chesed, kindness, social justice, when that reigns, R-E-I-G-N-S, at that time, then the fast days will still be commemorated. We won't forget, and that's the answer to Hillary's question. We'll never forget the tragedies that went on these days. But instead of sitting on the floor and beating our breasts and sitting without food, instead, these will be days of commemoration, days of prayer. What will the prayer be? The prayer, and this is one of the things that Rav Soloveitchik says, the prayer will be that we should pray that we should not mess it up again. We should pray that we should have the fortitude and the strength that emet, v'shalom, v'mishpat, v'tzedek, and all those things that we need, that social justice, that being kind to one another, that making sure that every single one of the Holocaust survivors has what to eat, making sure that if there are people on their own in our community and in any other community, have friends to speak to be there as a shoulder to rely on. Anybody that you know in Bidud, call them up, see if they need anything. That's what it means to be socially just. I heard yesterday from somebody that in Ra'anana, there is in the Anglo community in Ra'anana, there is and I'm not saying this is in a negative way. It sounds a bit negative. I don't mean it to be negative. They're all trying to outdo one another as to who can bring the best bidud package. So people are finding at their doors, people who are in bidud are finding at their doors packages of all sorts of things, of food and of gifts and of things to make them their bidud a little bit more bearable. I'm not suggesting that we should do it to outdo the next person, but the idea that we should be kind to one another, the idea that we should think, is there anybody around that might need something? The person that comes to shul that puts his hand out for a handout, don't let him go without you putting something in his hand. Or if you haven't got anything with him, say to him, I don't have any money with me. Give me your bank account details and I'll transfer whatever it is, 5 shekel, 10 shekel, 20 shekel, whatever it is you want to give. Nobody should have their hand out and not have something put inside it, whether you agree with their philosophy on life or you don't. That's what it means to be socially just. It means to be thinking about the ger, thinking about the stranger. That doesn't just mean the convert. That means anybody who finds themselves in a position where they don't feel at home, they don't feel comfortable. When somebody comes into your shul, do you welcome him? Do you give him a seat? Or do you shift him off your seat because he's had the temerity to get there before you got there and sat on your seat, even though you didn't get there till halfway through laning? Is that what we want? No, that's not what we want. That's not social justice. When all that nonsense is finished, and when we think about mishpat, tzedek, shalom, ve'emet, at that time we will have had our lesson learned, and then what you'll see then is this, verse 22 and verse 23. Many people and powerful nations shall come to entreat the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem and pray before Hashem. So said Hashem, in those days, when 10 men of all the language of the nation shall take hold of the skirt of a Jewish man, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. What's that telling us? That's telling us that we need to be so good at these things that we fulfill our role that was given to us way back when in the Brit Ben Abatarim, that when we were told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Avraham Avinu, our forefather, V'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpachot hadama. Through you, all the nations of the world will be blessed. What does that mean? It means that the nations of the world will look at us and say, wow, that is the way to behave. You know what? I'm going to imitate that. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. In other words, we need to be fulfilling our role, which is given to us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be Or Lagoyim, a light to the nations. We have to show the way forward. And if we show the way forward, if we can put our own house in order, and believe you me, we've got a long way to go before we put our own house in order. If we put our own house in order, then it will automatically happen. Verses 22 and 23 will automatically happen. The nations of the world will see that this is the way it's meant to be, and we will then merit the fact that they will come to us and have HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be the king of the world. Bayom hahu yiyeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. That is what the stakes are here. So the question is, should we still be mourning and crying on Tisha B'av? The answer is sadly yes. because we are so far away from this ideal. Just in the last couple of minutes, I want to show you, if I can find it. I don't know what I did with it. Let me see if I can find the thing I wanted to show you. I can't find it. Never mind. Go on to YouTube and look up a TED Talk, T-E-D, TED Talk, by a guy called Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. It's called The Golden Circle. And what he talks about is the where, not the where, the why, the what, and the how. And he says, why is it that the most successful company ever, Apple, is so successful? Because it doesn't talk about what it does, it talks about why it does it. It doesn't say to doesn't say to its people, you should buy my iPhone. It tells you why you need my iPhone. It's not the what that's important, it's the why. Go and have a look at his TED Talk. It's a very, very interesting TED Talk. It's only about 10 minutes. It's very worthwhile. His name is Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. It's called The Golden Circle. You apply this to here. The what is the fasting. The people at the time of Zecharia were asking, should we still fast? That's the equivalent of us saying the minutiae of the halachot of Tisha B'av. Yes, I've fasted. And yes, I'm also tired like you. I'm also hungry and I'm also thirsty. I could kill a cup of coffee, right? But that's the what. It's irrelevant. The question is why? Why am I fasting? Why have I sat on the floor this morning? Why have I spent all day reading miserable things and trying to get myself in the mood to be miserable? And the reason is the why. The why is that because the truth is, if the Waqf gave us the keys today and tomorrow we started building the Beit HaMikdash, we'd have a complete riot on our hands. Whose shechita are we going to have? Is it going to be Nusach Ashkenaz? Is it going to be Nusach Sfard? Are you going to have Bet Yosef? Or are you going to have Landau Hechsher? Who's going to? I'm not eating your meat. You brought a korban to the Beit HaMikdash. I'm not eating from your korban. I don't believe your shechita is correct. That's what's going to happen if we have a Beit HaMikdash tomorrow. We're never going to get anywhere because we are a fragmented people and we are not. We do not have shalom for emet between us. If we want the Beit HaMikdash, if we want the why, we need to get our acts together and we need to be looking at the prophecy of Zecharia. It's said by somebody much cleverer than I, a man who ignores history is destined to repeat the same mistakes again. We've got it clearly. Zecharia has told us what we needed to do. History has told us that in the second Beit HaMikdash, we blew it. We didn't do it right. Now we have a third opportunity. We've got a chance to do it right. Let's all do our bit. Let's all think about Emet, Tzedek, Chesed, Rachamim. Let's think about the widow, the orphan. Let's think about those people who are less fortunate than we are. And let's think whether we are being kind enough to them that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would turn around and say, yes, verse 19 is fulfilled. The end of verse 19 is fulfilled. I can see that they love truth and peace and kindness. And therefore, I'm going to turn all these fast days into days of celebration and commemoration and not days of mourning. Bimheira bi'ameinu. Amen.
Amen.
Mincha is in 20 minutes and we have to put our talit and tefillin, and I've got a 5-minute walk, so there's about 7 minutes for questions if anybody has questions. I can see Hillary waving at me. We can't hear you, Hillary. Unmute.
Hello?
Yeah.
Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay. It's quite odd that you mention number 22, right? Starting at 22, because if you think about the 22 kinot in most of the Aveka, apart from the odd one. Do you suppose that has anything to do with each other? I know there's no such thing as coincidences.
The number 22 is the number from Aleph to Taf, and I'm sure that the relevance of that is that from Aleph to Taf, from every single one of us, from the top of us to the bottom of us, we're all important. We all have to look after one another.
Thank you for a marvelous share.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jonathan, as you spoke, as Hazel up here. Because as you were saying the things, I kept saying to myself, "By God, we've got to change. Look at the corruption we have in the government and all that. How are we going to reach these people to make them realize what we need to do?" And I can see that we're going to have fasting and prayer on Tisha B'av for a long, long time to come, unfortunately, because we don't see it amongst ourselves. And I don't know how, although I'm much older now than I was in Leeds when I was a leader of a community. How do we pursue these people to make this country what we want?
Let me, I think that's a very good question. And I think the point is that if we think about that too hard, then we will become despondent and despairing, because you'll think it's not possible to change. How can we effect change on the government? How can we effect change on anybody? You know, there was a famous rabbi, and I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been the Stipler Rav, whoever it was. Some famous rabbi said that when he was young, he wanted to change the world.
Yeah.
As he got older, he realized that, you know, he better start and change his own family, his own town. As he got older, he thought, well, I better change my own family. And at the end of his life, he said, you know what? I think I better start with myself. We can only start with ourselves. If we, each individual of ours, takes it upon ourselves to do one or two extra kind things every single day, then that will affect change around us. It will affect change in our families, and then it will affect change in our communities. And eventually, Be'ezrat Hashem, if enough of us do it, it will affect change on our country, and then eventually it will affect change on the world. And that's when verses 22 and 23, which are still on the screen, will come to pass. So Hazel, you're right, it's hard. And yes, it looks like we're going to be at this fasting business for a while yet. But let's not despair. Let's do our bit. Each one of us, let's find something every single day that we can do, which is tzedek, mishpat, emet, chesed, v'rachamim. If we can do that, then there's a chance that we will get what we are craving.
I used your suggestion and I looked at Zecharia. Remember, you told me go look at it for this lecture, and I looked at it, and I was shocked to see that the Christians have taken this information that you related to us, and they put their own commentaries above it, which now I understand so much. It's so important. And because we didn't show that's who we were going to be, they decided to take it on with you know, their Jesus guy. So it's really, really important if we take this to ourselves and don't let anybody else grab it and take it away from us.
Nachum, you are spot on. Those of you who ever came across religious, devout Christians, I came across them at university. We used to call them the God Squad. Each one of them was a nicer person than the next. They all wanted to do chesed. And today, even in the English language, if you do something nasty to somebody, they may turn around to you and say, "That's not very Christian of you." And where have they got it from? It's
from us.
They've got it from the Torah. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that 36 references in the Torah to V'ahavta et hager, you shall love the stranger. That is mentioned in one way or another 36 times in the Torah. Okay, 36 is a very important number. Lamed Vav. There are 36 hidden tzaddikim. Actually, there's only 35 now because we know who one of them is. But there's only 35 now. But 36 hidden tzaddikim. Philip, it's you, in case you were wondering who it was. Okay, so
I knew that.
Right.
I knew that.
Right, Nachum, you're absolutely right. We must take back our heritage, and our heritage is the Torah, and the Torah is a handbook and a rule book for doing chesed ve'emet, and that is what the Jewish people need to be about. If you are in a community where you have 1 million gemachim, gemach stands for gemilat chasadim, people doing kindnesses. In the community where I came from in Manchester, there was a gemach. You could borrow anything. You could even borrow somebody's tie to go to shul in. People were falling over themselves to do kindness, usually the women rather than the men, to be honest. But that's the kind of thing that we've got to get back to. We've got to get back to doing kindnesses for people. Social justice is the key to our success. And I'm just going to end by saying that in our community here in Poleg, I believe that we are doing our bit. We can do more. Of course, we can do more. We always can do more. But I just want to give a shout out for all the people in our community who do help out. There are loads and loads of people who volunteer, and I'm sure it's the same in North Netanya. I can see a few of you from North Netanya. I'm sure it's the same in Ra'anana as well. A shout out for the people that do all the chesed, all the volunteering that you do, all the deliveries of food to people who haven't got, leket, and all those things. These are the things that are building the Beit HaMikdash. Do not believe for one moment that you are just filling your time. You are building the Beit HaMikdash brick by brick. And on that, I'm going to wish you that next year we shall have a commemoration and not a fast day. Get to it, do your chesed, and Bezrat Hashem, we will be able to meet in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, next year.
Johnny, I just want to tell you one thing before you go. I'm a tzaddik. I didn't even get upset when you didn't phone me yesterday to wish me a happy birthday.
Tzaddik Fedoro, that's you, Philip. I'm off to Mincha. Anybody that wants to come to Mincha, we're going to be davening at 7 o'clock.